are so thrilled you're here to join us for this next episode of Morning Coffee with Media. And we have the incredible Hetty Chang from NBC4. Welcome, Hetty.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much.
As I look across this room, we have a full house today, and I am honored by some of the people that are in this room. We have a lot of wonderful leaders that I did not expect to have you here. It's just incredible. So thank you so much for joining us. And I know it's because they want to hear from you, Hetty. About 2 years ago, Vicki Vargas from NBC, who covered the Los Angeles Southland area for nearly 40 years. I know she doesn't want me to act like she's old, but come on, 40 years.
I think it's safe to, we all watched her growing up, and
All
we
of
say
us.
that in the nicest way.
Yes.
Yeah, she's incredible. And for the record, she cannot be replaced. So I try really hard. She's, she's just a wonderful person and obviously a wonderful journalist. So I'm trying. We call her the Queen of OC.
Oh, yeah, she is.
I'm the princess.
She is the queen. She is the queen. And she told us, she actually, I know you watched it, she broke the news that you are our new OC-based reporter. And we were like, who's Hetty Chang? Well, turns out Hetty's actually been with NBC for over 10 years, nearly 10 years, over 10 years.
I started January 2013, which you think about it and it's like, oh, that was recent. No, it actually wasn't. It's like, we were just talking earlier just about how I feel like the pandemic put us all in a time warp and we're not really too sure how many years passed. And so, yeah, it's been about 10 years.
Yeah. Well, the reason why she wasn't as familiar is because she covered the 11 o'clock news, which many of us don't stay up and watch the 11 o'clock news.
I don't blame you. I have a baby now, and so I'm asleep by 9:30. And we were talking earlier just this morning about how, honestly, I would kind of delete all the PR pitches because that's not what we really did at night. The stories came to us, and so, we would go into an afternoon pitch meeting, and if your story wasn't happening yet, it was going to happen before 11, right? So it's just a different
breaking
pace,
news.
a different type of news telling. And I did that maybe for about 7 years. So I started at KNBC in January 2012. I covered mostly Long Beach and South Bay, and I was working a day shift. And then I was there for maybe about 2 years before moving to the night side shift. And I loved that too. I loved the pace of breaking news, but it was definitely a different type of story. And I did not read any PR pitches, but I do now.
Yes.
So it all kind of happened. We were in a transition. Obviously the pandemic happened, which changed everything. Vicki and a lot of the veteran news reporters we grew up watching, for those who grew up in Southern California, they all retired. And good for them because they were working so hard for so many decades, right?
Yeah.
So they all retired at the end of December 2022. And then I went on maternity leave April 2023. Yeah. And then so Orange County really, was just, there was no one really assigned to it. And then
I know she teased us. She said, oh, I'm going to tell you, it's Hetty Chang. And you need to have her on the show. And I'm like, okay. And she goes, but she's on maternity leave.
Yeah. Vicki, I joked with Vicki. I was like, you booked me when I was on leave. So I have Vicki to thank for this. And again, she's wonderful. And I'm so excited to be here. But yeah, so I came back from maternity leave January of this year.
Yes.
To cover Orange County full time on a daytime shift, which is great for mommyhood as well.
Yeah, and we so I wasn't quite sure when you were coming back, and then we had that story with City of Hope and the Younger Faces of Cancer, that press conference, and I'm like, Hetty, we need to meet.
Yes.
Apparently, you need to come to my office.
Yes.
Can you come? And so we're here. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So I want you all to get an inside scoop on who Hetty is. So I am going to open the door to the background of your life and how you found yourself into the path of journalism.
So, interesting question. I actually don't like talking about myself, so I found a career talking about other people. I don't really like the spotlight, and so I found a career telling other people's stories, which is what we do, right? But because I have to, I grew up in Southern California, in Cerritos, California. My parents still live there. And I wanted to become a reporter for as long as I can remember. And I know it's going to sound a little bit weird, but I was inspired by a tragedy. In 1986, Labor Day weekend, there was one of the worst mid-air disasters in aviation history. There was an Aeromexico plane that collided with a small plane mid-air, and it landed in my neighborhood, 5 houses away from mine. Yeah, I was at Toys R Us with my parents, going down 183rd, and we saw this big plume of smoke. And as we got closer and closer to that plume, we were like, that's our neighborhood. And so my grandma was home at the time. We didn't know what was happening with her. Of course, at that time, we had no cell phones, no sort of communication. But we got home and saw it all, right? And I say that it inspired me, not because it was tragic, right, but I was inspired by the stories that came out and sort of fascinated by the news crews who were camping out in our neighborhood. Many of the colleagues that I worked with, Conan Nolan, Patrick Healy.
Wow. These are some veterans.
Yes, and so you can understand why I was a little starstruck when I started at KNBC, because this is the station that we grew up watching, and these are veteran news reporters that I got to work with side by side before they retired. Conan's still there. Yeah. But I was inspired in a weird way by that tragedy. I wanted to tell those stories.
Well, you also could tell that story in your life. It was in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
You were one of their stories.
Yeah, and we did end up doing a longer form piece, because now it's not just TV anymore, right? We have streaming services. We have what we call our fast channels, right? So we were able to do this longer form mini documentary about that experience through my eyes as a kid. And that was, a really impactful story for me, because like you said, Brenda, it's like we're not the story, and we tell other people's stories, and that was a different kind of journalism, I think, for me to delve in and talk about my experience and what I saw, what I remember, how it impacted my family.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So you wanted to be a journalist, but you studied sociology and Asian American studies. So.
Yeah, so that is another long story. So I went to UCI for 2 years, and I transferred. Zot, who said Zot? Zot, yeah. And then I transferred to UCLA after my second year at UCI, and I just figured my resources might be more accessible at UCLA versus Irvine. And the communication programs at the time was kind of geared towards, it wasn't journalism. And I, in fact, I don't really know if they have a journalism program as strong as USC's. But so I decided to stick under sociology because I like writing. And I think most people know this now, but we do write our own stuff. So yes, we write everything that you see. We even write what the anchors read when they're tossing to us in the field. So,
and your story now ends up online.
Oh, all of it, right?
So we get to read your words, not just hear them.
Yes. So I stuck to sociology because it was sort of a broad study, and I enjoyed the writing aspect of it. I had somewhat of a hard time getting my first internship with a sociology degree because everybody wanted a journalism degree. So I think there was Google at the time, but I somehow found all of the cable stations in our area, and I wrote to each one. And I said, I'm looking to learn about journalism, and please give me a chance. And so LA City View Channel 35, which is the city-owned cable station, gave me a chance. Oh. And so I did my internship there. I made what's called a resume reel.
I was going to say, you got your reel.
I sent it out to all the stations that I thought I could survive in. So I sent out maybe like 22 tapes. I heard back from Anchorage, Alaska, the ABC station there, and the NBC station in Reno, Nevada. I chose Reno because I'm a Southern California gal and I couldn't survive in Anchorage.
Wait, did you? I think Bob DeCastro did Reno, right?
He did Reno, and I think he did Vegas.
Yes,
but we missed each other.
Oh, you did. On
yeah,
both
it's a
of
very
those.
small. It's a very small world.
I'm like, wait, I've heard this story. Reno, Vegas.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it's like this anymore, but most of us, we started in smaller markets, made our mistakes, got our experience, worked on our craft, and then you kind of move your way up to a major market like Los Angeles, which is the number two market. Yeah. Lucky for me, it happened to be home, right? I always knew I wanted to come home, and KNBC came calling, and I remember I was coming back from an event on the Las Vegas Strip, and I had gotten the call, and I pulled over, got out of my car, and just went, yeah!
Oh, I love that.
I was so thrilled. And yeah, I've been home for 11 years now, and it's the best job in the world, because at the station I grew up watching, I was so starstruck when we're in Burbank. We're now based at Universal Studios, but I saw Kathy Vara in the stairwell, and I called her Kathy Vargas, because I got Mickey Vargas and Kathy Vara mixed up because I was so nervous. But yeah, it's just I don't have much to compare it to, because I did PR for a short time, which we can talk about, but it's the best job in the world.
Yeah, I love that. I do actually I would love for you to share what you shared with me. Oftentimes, especially as, I've been in the industry for, I don't even want to age myself, but I'm going to just say over 2 decades. I don't think I'm ready to say close to 3. I think I can say, if it's under 25, right?
Yeah.
You can say
25 is the new 50.
But I've seen the changing newsrooms. I've seen media outlets shrink, newsrooms shrink, get bought up by each other. How storytelling's told is very different. We have social media, which, everyone publishes their own content. But the jobs of media have shifted, and many jobs have gone away. Yep. So that has caused a lot of journalists to become PR people. And oftentimes they think it's pretty easy when they're on the other side. And many times later, I get phone calls saying, oh my gosh, this is the hardest job ever.
It's hard. What you guys do is hard.
But you actually did it for 8 months.
I did. So in between the NBC station in Vegas and KNBC, I did PR for the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, the LVCVA.
That's not just any PR job. That's actually really intense.
It's a big job. It's like, you want me to do it? Okay. But I was kind of at a point in my career where I was like, do I stick with news? I was kind of at a little bit of a lull, I guess. And as journalists, I think we all think, like the grass is greener on the other side. PR seems like you get to be indoors, you have access to a bathroom. Those are the perks that we look for, right? Like bathroom, free food, air conditioning, So I said, I'm going to, give it a whirl. And so I did stories with the PR person at the LVCVA, and he offered me the job. And I did love it. I got to sell Las Vegas. That's pretty easy to do.
The good, bad, and the ugly.
The good, the bad, the ugly. I actually was in charge of
the good.
Promoting the business side of things, right? Because it is a business destination as well with the convention space. And look at me, I've got my
you just went
message
right
points
in there.
glued into my brain. What I thought was challenging, and this is my journalist mind, is PR, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys do your jobs really well and you're professionals, is a lot about crafting the message, right? You got to craft the message, and then you got to take a step back, figure out who's going to deliver that message, and then you got to wait for people to get back to you on those things. And as a journalist, I'm like, why can't I just give Luis the answer, right? He's wondering how much the, Consumer Electronics Show is going to bring in as far as economic impact. And I know the number, right? But I think, my job was like, well, who should deliver that? Should it be the vice president of sales? Should it be our CEO? And it was hard for me to grasp that, And I was telling Brenda earlier, I think one of the things I love about my job is I get to think about what I'm going to do in the morning, pitch it. We do everything in a day, right? So they're like, great, go work on the fire. And I get my interviews, we shoot our B-roll, we put it together, we edit it, and you get to see me on air with it within that day. And then you move on to something else. And PR, I had like 17 manila folders on my desk because I was waiting for answers, and it was hard for me to grasp that. But
yeah, it's a lot of balls in the air.
A lot of balls in the air. And what you guys do is it's an important, but also a job that's difficult and perhaps not as glamorous as people think, with the bathrooms and the air conditioning, right?
Or like when Sex and the City was all the rave and Kim Cattrall's character, everyone thought that was PR. I'm like,
yeah, I know.
I
know. You guys, you work really hard, and sometimes I think that our jobs are similar in that we can't control certain things, right? Like you work so hard for a client and you get everything going and you plan everything as much as you can, and then something blows up, right? And then it's like no one comes. And I had one experience like that when I was doing PR for LVCVA. I was working on this really, big press conference, and there was a breaker and no one showed up.
Yeah,
and I
tough.
begged, my former colleagues, like, please at least send someone, and, thankfully we had good relationships. But yeah, it's.
I think Forbes issues a report. I don't know if they've done it recently, but I remember feeling very validated like 15 years ago when I saw it, that a PR executive's job is the number 3 most stressful jobs.
I believe
next
it.
to military and then first responders.
Yeah. You got to deal with journalists. That's stressful.
Well, you just have to manage a lot of things that aren't within your control.
Yeah.
But, I always say you do your best practice, right? You build a great strategy. You deliver really quality positioning materials. You think through the story. You make sure it's newsworthy. You pitch it. And then you hope that upfront work is enough. And then you also leverage your relationships.
Yep.
And and then you hope for the best. And if it doesn't happen, then it's very hard because a client is investing that time into that. And there's so much that is out of our control. All we can do is invest in best practices and relationships. So let's talk about that. What are some of the things that are so important to you with your sources, with the network of communicators in the Southland? What are some of the things that you really look for?
To your point, relationships, right? I've been working with some of these PIOs for a really long time, and we often, it's very reactive, right? Yeah. If something happens, we're on the phone with them constantly, and if you're annoying, you got to build those relationships because then they trust you and they know that you're going to be accurate. They know you're going to be fair. And they'll get you the information you need. And oftentimes in a breaking news situation, you've got, 6 local newsrooms calling you, assignment desk editors calling you, and we're all asking for the same thing. So I'm sure it's easily, frustrating to be like, I just told you this. And I'm like, well, I'm NBC, not ABC or KCAL. We're competitors, So, but yeah, I think definitely building relationships and really knowing your audience, right? I mean, in PR, I think that's a big thing to know your audience. And like I said, and this is not like a knock on PR professionals by any means, but just because I was working night side and reporting for the 11, I would delete so many emails. Like, I'm not going to cover the National Hamburger Week, because this is not it's not what I do. And if you just do a quick Google on me, you'll know the nature of my stories, right? So you have to know who you're pitching to.
Right.
And, even just this year, like starting in January, I kind of had to relearn a different kind of storytelling because on the night side shift, it was often, 9 o'clock, 9:30, the story that you were working on, guess what? It's not anymore because there's a breaking news situation that happened, and I would get on the road, and sometimes it'd be like 10:30, right? So you're on at 11, and you call the news desk and say, what do we have? And they're like, oh, we flew the chopper. There's some aerial footage. we have a soundbite from someone from the field, and then, sometimes you get there at like 10:50 and you're on the air at 11. And so it was a different kind of writing, a different kind of storytelling, because you had everything right in front of you, right? You talk about what's behind you. You talk about what investigators are doing. We heard from a witness. This is what he had to say. Back to you,
Yeah.
And so when I came back to a dayside shift, and it was a little more, the stories had more substance, I would say. I had to sort of relearn that storytelling, and I had to look at the pitches, because it was like, these are good stories.
Yeah.
These are really good stories. They're meaningful. They're impactful. They impact the communities. They impact our viewers, and there's PR representatives behind them knowing exactly what we're looking for, right? To tell a good story.
Yeah.
So that, not just the region of, what I'm focused on changed, but also the nature of the stories I tell.
Yeah. Well, and I think that one of the things that I have found over the years is how hard it is to deliver really informative pieces, but then also have to encounter the human element of it. You were just sharing about that headline, if it's okay if I bring that up.
Yeah.
We all read the story with the heat wave we just experienced, and that tragic situation of the 3-year-old who was left in the car, and she died of severe heat, and the mother was found passed out and intoxicated. It was a tragic story, and I had only read the headlines. It came out a few days ago, right? Well, Hetty, tell us what you just experienced yesterday.
So I was coming back from the fire, and I'm not sick, I promise. My voice is hoarse because I've been covering the fires and breathing in all that smoke. Shout out to our first responders and our firefighters. I don't know how they do it. But I was coming back from the airport fire, which started in Orange County, and it's now, moved over to Riverside County. And I spoke with the father of that 3-year-old. And we had been trying to get in touch with him, all weekend. And I think that's where I started my day on Monday before I was moved to the fires. And I said, I think it's important that we hear from you. And he was able to do a Zoom right away. That's how the pandemic changed our jobs too, right? So I pulled over to a parking lot, and I Zoomed with him. And, I had in my mind what I thought he might say, and it wasn't anything like that at all. He said that they had lost 2 previous children. 10 years ago, their older sons, they were on a camping trip in North Dakota, and in a freak accident, they were run over by a DUI driver.
I just can't even believe this.
I know. So mom and dad of those kids fought for DUI, tougher DUI legislation in North Dakota. This is according to the OCDA's press release. And, the father of the children said, she never recovered from that. I mean, how do you? Fast forward, they had 2 more kids, a 5-year-old son and 3-year-old Eiley. And she had suffered from severe postpartum depression, according to dad, and just alcoholism. And, now she's living with the fact that her 3-year-old died in the car, because she was severely intoxicated.
Yeah.
It's just a tragic story all around. Yeah. And it's hard not to feel, right? Like we talked about how we have our professions in life, right? But we're humans.
Yeah.
All of us are human, right? Like you go home, you're mom.
Yeah.
I now go home and I'm mom, So I think that's, one of the important things that I wanted to talk about. It's like we're human, and yes, we're not the story, and we're telling other people's stories, but it's okay to show that this impacted you. How can you not be impacted by a story like that? Right. So that was a hard one. And, writing that story, my colleague, Eduardo Santiago, he's wonderful, and a shout out to him. He's our Orange County photographer. He has a little son too. He has a 8-month-old. And so
that probably,
I think, we had compassion as journalists without kids, but just, for me as a mom, it's a different level of compassion. It's just a little, it's different, you
Right.
know? And so I often find myself breaking down in front of, my interview subjects. And I think back in the day that was like, that's a no-no,
Right.
But I don't think that's a no-no. I think it's like, it shows that you're a person, right? That
Right.
you're not this robot, speaking of AI,
Right.
right? You're not a robot. Like, you cannot replace that with artificial intelligence, right?
Right. Well, I feel like we've lived as a society through some big things. I think you mentioned the pandemic earlier, how it changed journalism, but also there's these big tragedies that we've lived through, and and they kind of keep growing as big issues. So many people don't know, but Hetty, one of the bigger stories of your career that you covered was the Las Vegas mass shooting. But it wasn't when you were a reporter in Vegas. It was when you were a reporter here, because it really was an Orange County, LA story.
Orange County, LA, and the Inland Empire.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are attending that, what was supposed to be such a happy event, were from this area.
Yeah.
But that was, just a terrible story. It was surreal to return to Vegas,
Right.
kind of my second home, and cover this tragedy. But it's, you didn't have to be there to feel, to feel that story. I mean,
Right.
it was just like the death toll just kept climbing and climbing, and there was just so many stories. And that's what we do. Like, we tell people stories. We tell who they were.
Yeah.
We tell how the families are dealing and grieving. And
Yeah. Well, I want to give Waymakers is here. A few people from Waymakers. They are they work with victims of violence, and they were first responders to help provide immediate trauma care to the victims of violence that they experienced that. We also were strangely, the timing of that happened on a Sunday, and we were set to open the new 5-Point Live Nation amphitheater here in Irvine. I think 3 days later, and we have people from 5-Point here too, right all the way in the back there. And I got the call and didn't know it was a Live Nation concert when I was watching the news, and all of a sudden it hit me that, oh, this is Live Nation. Oh, we're opening an amphitheater in 3 days. How are we going to do this? And many of the people we were working with Live Nation were there experiencing this tragedy. And everything changes when you're in these things and these moments, because we're human. Yeah. And we come together and we figure it out. And we did end up figuring it out and changed all of our strategies on that. But it brings you together in different ways. Yeah. But then you end up sitting there in the middle of an empty amphitheater, looking around you saying, whoa, this is real. Like, this threat is real. It could happen to any of us. Yeah. And we've been seeing these stories of shootings on the rise. We just had one last week. I mean, what is it like for you to see these stories? We had a mass shooting just a few years ago.
Monterey Park.
Yeah.
So, that's the not so fun part of our job, right? I mean, these are, important stories to cover nonetheless, because they do impact people. They impact the communities that we cover. That day, Super Mario Land, I'm going to get, I need to say this right because I'm owned by Universal.
And Universal Studios, my daughter just went there. That's why I know.
Super Mario World had just opened. Employees were going to be given a chance to go there as a preview, and so I was going to take my friend and her kids. But that morning, I was just recovering from COVID.
Oh man!
Yeah, it was, and I got the call from the newsroom that I needed to go to Monterey Park, and that's my community too.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in Monterey Park, but right away, I thought in my head, like, was this a hate crime?
Right. I was going to say, we all thought it was a hate crime.
Yeah. And so, then, obviously we didn't go to Super Mario World that day. And it was, I was sad about it because my friend's son was looking forward to it. But yeah, yeah, it's part of the job, and we do it because it's important, right? And I think that's another reason why I love what we do so much, is because you're sharing people's stories, right, to a wide audience, which is now not just TV, but your cell phone and your streaming services and all of that. And what an awesome responsibility, right?
Right.
And so much of a reason to get it right.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're telling their story. You got to be accurate. You got to have the right tone. You got to make sure how you're presenting it is how you would want your story presented, right? And so that's why, we do it. I do cover like happy stories
Yes,
too.
you do.
I went to the Winter Olympics, and I covered
I saw
wonderful,
that.
stories about these Olympians who have worked their whole life to get to this world stage. And that's one of the few times I've actually traveled internationally for this job, because we're the local affiliates. We cover what's happening here. But
Right.
We were following, the Southern California athletes who have ties to Southern California.
Did you cover any of the recent Olympians?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing is that we're the NBC, we're the Olympic station.
Yeah.
Right, and we're all going to be covering it in 2028 because,
Yay!
yes, which
So
is around the
excited.
corner.
It really is.
It really is. But yeah, I love sharing those stories too, because I think sports, I'm not a sports reporter, but I pretend to be one during the Olympics. But sports is such the great story, right? Because it's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. And you have these elite athletes who work all their lives for this moment, and it's just, those are such great stories to tell, even when, they're not victorious. It's like they come back and it's like a story about redemption, But it's just an incredible experience. I was in South Korea for 18 days. It felt like 180 days. But, we're working for every show. So you're live in the morning show. You're live in every show. So we were live in the morning, and that was nighttime for us. And then we went to sleep for a few hours. We woke up, and then we were in the afternoon shows. And then I'm terrible at time math. And then we're alive again when it was the 11 p.m.
So
here.
it's just nonstop.
It was nonstop, but just an incredible experience.
Are you kind of disappointed they didn't put you in Paris?
I just couldn't leave my daughter for that long.
I know, it's so hard, right?
Yeah, the Summer Games is much bigger because we have so many Southern California athletes who do summer games. Figure skaters and ice skaters, like they often are from other parts of the country. But so they usually send, the morning anchors for that. And just because timing wise, it worked out really nicely because it was the morning show at the time when competitions were happening.
Well, I think Snoop Dogg stole the show, and he's an LA Long Beach story, right?
Yeah, and my husband was saying, what's really cool? Like, you can call Snoop Dogg is technically your colleague. I'm like, yeah. For shizzle.
That's funny.
I know. I try my jokes on him all the time, and he's like, don't say that one. Or you're like, that's not funny. Like, just be yourself.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about being a new mom, but do you want to introduce us to who your daughter is?
So her name is Olivia. We call her Livy. She's 16 months now, so almost a year and a half. She went from crawling to sprinting. And so she's just, amazing. We made the decision to have kids much later in life. And so that was a little bit of a transition to, be focused on your career for so long. And then you have this
Little human.
amazing blessing that you don't know what to do. We had it's funny because we delivered at Kaiser Irvine, and I happened to be doing a story there yesterday, and I was like, oh my God, we begged to stay. People I guess most people want to go home with their baby, and we're like, I don't know how to, what do we do with this baby? And so we begged them to stay. We stayed for 5 days.
Yes. Oh, wow. You know what? I remember someone just saying, if they want to take the baby, let him take the baby while you sleep. Just sleep while you're in the hospital. And I did. I was like, you can take her.
Yeah.
But then bring her back. I just need to sleep. I didn't get it the first time. The second time I was like, all right, I need to sleep.
Yeah,
Because you don't sleep after that.
I know. I mean, we stayed for 5 days.
That's a long time, Hetty.
It's
I
a
think
long
that your NBC perks probably helped that happen.
They didn't know who I was. They just, Olivia's mom. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I never really understood what, motherhood could be, just because I was kind of like, I'd be okay without, like both my husband and I were like, yeah, we'd be okay. And then we're like, no, like, I think it's, there's something more to life than career. And so we made that decision really late. But now, we're just tired.
Yeah.
We're old. And so I'm like running around with her.
It gets easier. You're in the thick of it.
I know. But she's wonderful. And it's, I think it's changed me as a journalist for the better, right?
Yeah.
Again, like I had compassion as a person, but I think as a mom, the stories just, they hit a little bit differently. And I've kind of learned not to sweat the small stuff, because there's more important things to life than your live shot not working, right? Or like, which happened at the fire because our communication towers are up there in Santiago Peak.
Wow.
But, I think a lot of moms can relate, right? Like you try to be 100% at home and you try to be 100% at work, and
it's a balance.
You just do your best.
Yeah. You do.
You do your best and you're doing great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you now live in Tustin.
Yes.
And you love Orange County.
I do.
We have such a diverse community here, from LA all the way through the Inland Empire. And one of the things that I think is so unique is that we have such a large Asian American Pacific Islander population. And we talked a little bit about some trends that are happening within the media landscape. We are going to get to AI, but I do want to talk about diversity within the newsroom, how you've seen NBC embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I thought it was really interesting, especially your experience inside the newsroom that we don't actually get to see all the time, but then it's reflected out in the stories. Do you want to share about your experience with that with NBC?
Yeah, I don't really get to see inside the newsroom either because I go wherever the story goes. I haven't been to the newsroom in maybe since the beginning of the year. I think the last time I was there was in February.
When the pandemic happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I think that, we do a good job. I can only speak for NBC, and I think the other stations do a really good job too. Yeah. But, we make sure that we do reflect the communities that we cover. Yeah. I think most people know this, but maybe not. So we're the same company as Telemundo. We are the same station. We share the same newsroom. We are all colleagues. And so anytime we go to a story and I get an English interview, I try to get a Spanish interview as well, vice versa. When Telemundo's out there and they're getting Spanish interviews, they ask for an English interview. And we are, together. We are one team. And, we really do want to share those stories that are important to the communities we cover, right? And so Hispanic Heritage Month, for example, is coming. I just shot a story yesterday for it. And we used to have the resources to do these, beautiful 30-minute specials that would air on, a Saturday. But like with every industry, everything's shrinking and we just don't have the resources anymore. So we try to do 2 to 3 stories a week for those Heritage Months. So, for Hispanic Heritage Month, we'll turn a few stories in addition to our, whatever happens with the daily news grind.
That's great to know, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great.
I'm looking for those stories. We did it for AANHPI month as well.
Okay, please.
The acronym.
Break that down.
Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander month. Yeah.
That's great. By the way, I have a straight line of
I know.
With Allie Edwards right here from Groundswell.
Oh, I don't.
Former OC Human Relations.
Hi.
Leading DEI expert in our county. So that she was nodding along in your acronym breakdown.
Yes, HPI. But yeah, we talked a little bit about the pandemic and when the, Asian hate, the Stop Asian Hate was happening, I was sharing with Brenda that culturally for me, I think a lot of Asian cultures, you don't talk about yourself, right? And you don't talk about your struggles and, whatever you're going through, you just kind of put your head down, you work hard, don't rock the boat, don't complain, do what you do, and just work hard, right? And so when that was happening, a lot of us did not feel, that we should we felt uncomfortable sharing that story, right? Because it was terrible, right? Like our elder, like our grandparents were getting attacked for what, And my news director at the time, I was very appreciative because she said, why aren't we telling those stories? Like, why isn't anyone speaking out? And I said, culturally, we're told not to. We're told just to sweep it under the rug. It's fine. We're going to keep our heads down and work hard, right? And just get through it, And she held a town hall meeting with anyone who wanted to join, all the Asian American colleagues. And she said, this is your safe space. This is your forum. What are you feeling? And honestly, it took a good minute for anyone to speak up just because it's thousands of years of, cultural beliefs, right? But then it just all started pouring out, and we're like, no, it's important to tell this story because if you're not going to speak up for yourself, no one else is going to, And so I thought that was really impactful, both professionally and personally for me to kind of, step out of my comfort zone and be like, these are important stories. This is the lead story, We're not going to just sweep it under the rug. We're going to show statistics, we're going to talk with the families that this is happening to and raise awareness.
Yeah. I love that. I remember being in a meeting with Allie once, and she said one hate incident against one person sends a message to an entire community.
Yeah.
So being able to share the stories and to talk about them validates someone's experience and maybe gives them courage. So
Right.
I'm really glad that you were able to do that.
Right. I am too. I am too.
I think it's great to hear that the stations that we watch value the people and all of the different fabrics that we bring together. So thank you for sharing that about NBC, and they've always been an incredible champion of DEI.
Good. I'm glad.
So I want to open it up for questions, and we had a whole list.
I know.
We had a meeting before last week trying to talk through what kind of trends are hitting journalism and what's Hetty's perspective on it. And we were going to land on AI. But Tiffany last time actually opened the question with Todd Harmonson on our last episode about AI. So I'm just going to put her on the spot.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Aguinaldo, President-elect of OCPRSA and Account Director at Forge Media Group. We are all competing for eyes and ears in both of our professions. It just dawned on me just sitting here, the content creators that are making this their livelihood go into it without an audience, wanting an audience, and we go into it thinking we have an audience. How do you shape your stories to compete with not only content creators, but the other storytellers in your profession, and then you add AI into it?
Well, that is a really good question.
That is a really good question. Go.
I know, man. How much time do we have left? For me, a story has to have a character. It has to have a person, right? For someone to relate to it. You all represent clients who are doing really important work out there. And while I do know that it's important to get the faces of those companies or the faces of those nonprofits up there, and we do think it's equally important for them to be up there, but even more so importantly, I want to hear about the family. I want to hear about the family that is benefiting from the services, because that's the story that's going to resonate with people, right? Like a family who's, both breadwinners lost their job. They've never been in this situation before. They've never had to go to a food bank before. They've never had to get free diapers. We want to hear from those people because, to your point, Brenda, then other people can say oh, there's resources like that and oh, it's okay to share our story, right? And then those are the stories that we're going to remember. So I would say that's what sets us apart from. Was that your question?
Yeah.
And then and to the AI point, what we call AI, because there's good parts and bad parts, right? I think the good part is perhaps it could make us all more efficient, right?
Yeah.
Like you're using it to transcribe an interview. I'm old school. Like I like to do my interview and I like to listen and log it by myself verbatim because it helps me
With your
remember what the
positioning.
emotion is like, what the tone is like. A lot of the youngsters, they like to just, grab the transcript, and then, it generates it for them, which is great. It makes things more efficient. But back to the whole human aspect of stories, like AI can't replace that, right? AI cannot replace the relationship that you build, the trust that you build with whoever you're interviewing. It can't, I guess it could, but it can't really, have a natural conversation, right? Or a follow-up question that came up in your head while the other person was talking. And it can't replace that emotion,
Yeah.
I think. It's not human, right? And I think as far as content creators and influencers, look, that's just, it's a different type of storytelling, right? I think just, especially in the past several years, we've really had to educate people and, really reinforce what we do as a local NBC station, right? An affiliate that is a true journalistic organization.
Yeah.
We're going to get all sides of the story. We're going to present it factually with fact checks and being accurate and being fair. I think, right, like the content producers and social media influencers, they have a message, right, that they're trying to craft. They're not trying to, get all sides of the story. Like for me to put something on TV, I like to have, if it's an investigation, like 2 independent sources to verify it. Mm-hmm. Even if it's, some tragedy and, there's a vigil taking place that is honoring the young person who died. There could be pictures of that young person. There could be friends sharing that person's story. If I don't have family and I don't have an official saying that person's name, I'm not going to report it. Like that's how stringent, local journalism is.
You're actually speaking to an interesting thing. I just I read after the Democratic National Convention. Jessica Yellen is a former, I think, CNN. Do you follow her?
Yes.
Yeah, she's a former news producer. So she has the ethics of journalism and that stringent kind of requirement in how she approaches stories. But she broke this story about how the DNC gave very valuable journalist time to social media influencers to also cover the convention. And journalists were kind of upset because getting some of the speakers at the convention, getting interview time was really hard to do. And then all of a sudden, these very reputable news sources aren't getting the time because they gave it to a couple, for the very first time, a couple news influencers.
Interesting.
And she covered a whole story on it. And but it came down to what you're talking about. Yes, they have audiences. Yes, they have reach. Everyone understands how you leverage and integrate that, right? But what's missing is the journalistic standards.
Yes.
In some cases, I mean, she has them, but
right.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's just we're held to a different standard,
Yeah.
right? And I think these days, like we're so in our echo chambers, right?
Yeah.
Like you're on Facebook, and your whole surroundings and environment share your similar viewpoints, right? And so I think we're kind of at a day and an age now that we're like, if you see a story that has all sides presented, guess what? You're hearing a side that you don't necessarily agree with. And so it's really easy to be like, oh, that reporter got it wrong, or like, no, that's not true.
right.
So, and that's how our minds work now, right? It's like, oh, you hear the other side and you automatically think that it's bias or like, when really that is our main job, is to get it right, get the facts out there, fact check them before you put them on air, and present all sides of the story. And I think, when all the analysts and all these different channels and, bloggers and, and anyone could have a channel, right? Like
Right.
we're at a scene, and I've seen so many times where people just start recording, right? When they think something is happening, and they can create their own narrative. They're like, oh, look at this guy. He's being harassed, whatever, by A, B, or C. When really, like, nothing's happening, right?
Right.
But this person, it has their channel, they have their followers, and they're listening to that narrative that, guess what? It wasn't confirmed by anyone. They're just talking about what they think is happening, and then it just goes crazy, right?
Right.
And that's not what we do as journalists, right? Like, we have standards that we follow. We have a checklist that we need to follow, because it's important.
Yeah.
It's important to get it right.
You got to have public trust.
Yep.
Yeah. Do we have other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Charlotte Beatty, Cox Communications, former OCPRSA president. I think what you're saying about getting the eye in the story is great, and I think Orange County does a great job of it with nonprofit and human interest stories.
Yes.
But for big companies that are here, how do you kind of dive into, we have to give a statement. It's usually coming down from legal approval and whatnot. How do you kind of get into like the big corporate stories to get into more the human interest of those? Does that make sense? Like, a company gives a big statement, and Ingram Micro or Experian or Cox gives a statement, but if there's more to that, do you have time to kind of dig into those stories, or do you see that happening more in the newsrooms locally?
I think that's a great question. I think that, on my daily news job, we go into a morning meeting at 9 every day. We talk about, what's happening at the moment, what we need to launch to right away. If it's like the fires, for example, like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to, go on a fire after this. But we'll also go around to reporter pitches, and we'll pitch stories. So there could be time, to set things up and say, okay, let's try to do this for, whatever, next Tuesday, and have, that statement, but also sort of the human interest aspect of that lined up. Because often, I so wish that we could move deadlines, but we are on air, and we find out what shows we're in at like 12:30. So right after that morning meeting, after we're assigned, we make those calls. The number one question is, when do you need the spy, or what's your timeline? We're like, now. I need it now.
So if Hetty calls you, it's now.
I know, but to your question, there is that room to be like, okay, it's going to take a little bit to set up. The human portion of it is perhaps not available, and then I'll pitch it for Tuesday. But as you know, things happen, especially in Southern California. So I always like to just get the story done, because you never know what's going to happen the next day, and then you can't do it, right? That tragic story in Anaheim was a good example. It was a really, really great story, an important story. And then, Trabuco Canyon blew up, and I had to move, But when you develop those relationships with journalists, that journalist is going to go to bat for your story and be like, look, we got floated from whatever. It was going to air at 4 p.m., but I'm going to push for it. I'm going to push for the 7 p.m. producer to run it, or the 11 p.m. producer to run it, or I'm going to pitch it the next day. And that's what happened with that Anaheim story. I did the interview on Tuesday night. Was it Tuesday night? Yeah, that was the debate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was too packed of a show, right, because the fires were happening and the debate. So the 7 p.m., the post-debate show ran a little bit of a story. The 11 p.m. didn't have time to put it in, and so I pitched it for the next day. And I'm like, this man has been through incredible tragedy that is unimaginable, and he has an important message to share. Like, let's do it. And so I did it. I put it together for the 5 p.m. yesterday, I think.
I think it's really good for us to know how much the reporters that we're working with are advocating for stories.
Yeah, and that's going to depend on each newsroom. I'm just
Totally.
speaking for myself, and also, that changes too, right? Based on like, who the managing editor is and what they feel like is the most important news of the day, which we get it. As journalists, we understand that there are stories that need to be covered because they're happening right now, But we're gonna fight for those stories.
Yeah.
You know, that may not happen at 5 p.m.
Right.
but could happen later.
Right. Well, it's always helpful to know, too. We had several stories lined up this week, but we had the debate working against us and the fires working against us.
Yes.
So we called multiple clients and said, you know what, we got to hold this story. Can we push it a few days? We need to give it a little breathing room.
Yeah.
And the fires have shifted. So it does provide a little relief, except you guys are down news crews because they have to go out further,
Yeah.
even if it's not in the region immediately. So
It's incredible how much stuff happens in Southern California
Yes.
on a daily. Like
Yes.
it is, like it would blow your mind just how much stuff happens.
yes. So we have time for one more question. We're going to wrap up. Maddie, her niece.
Hi, Hetty. I'm Madeline, her niece, CEO at Families Forward, and I can attest firsthand that the Telemundo NBC relationship, because you'll often interview me and say, do it again in Spanish.
Yes,
and
and she's
me
so
out.
great.
I actually had a question to Brenda's point earlier. You know, now that you're in kind of the primetime day, you know, with familiarity or recognition, maybe it's a silly question, but, you know, Vicky Vargas was just so well known, and I a firm believer is that you don't have to fill her shoes. You are creating your own rock star path.
Yay, Hetty.
But how
She
do
told me
you
not to
deal with
slouch
that?
today. This is why I'm going like this.
How do you deal with that increasing like recognition out in public, and how has that journey been for you, especially, you know, now that you're a mom, and what does that look like? I'm just curious.
Oh, that's such
that's
a great question.
It's a great one to end on, too. I love that.
know. Brian Jernigan, if you're watching, he was my classmate at Cerritos Elementary in 6th grade. He messaged me on Facebook and said, how did the shyest person in the class end up being on TV?
Aw.
And he said, I actually thought that you didn't talk. I was so shy. And I said, well, I guess I had a lot of questions to ask that were all bottled up and asking all the questions. But Vicky Vargas is, like I said, she's the queen of OC. And I'm just starting to get, shall I say, more focused on Orange County. And it's so wonderful because I get to actually meet all the people who had, you know, sent those pitches that I deleted. But not, again, you know, I'm
You're
saying.
not doing it anymore.
Yeah, not doing it anymore. But I don't know. It's cool. You know, it's I think, you know, with the advent of everything being on your phone or your tablet, or, you know, the cord cutters who no longer, they're like, what's TV? Like, I still think it's really cool at the end of the day that you get to be on TV, and that's cool. You know, I it's always something that I feel like I'm not super comfortable with, you know, but I don't get recognized as much as, you know, Vicky Vargas. But, you know, sometimes when people see, it's interesting because I never had any reason to walk around my neighborhood. I worked the night shift. I went to the gym, like we went to work and then came home. And so I never knew any of my neighbors. Then we had a kid, and I was like, I got to walk this baby around. And so I finally got to know my neighbors that I've been like living in the same neighborhood for like 7 years, and I never met them. And so they know me as mom, right? Like Livy's mom. And then when I said I'm going back to work, they were like, you're a journalist? Like you're on TV? You know, because they're used to seeing me with like, you know, diaper cream, you know, like all over. Like we like to joke, Desitin strikes again, because
Oh, my gosh.
it's so hard to get off.
It is.
But yeah, they're used to seeing me as, you know, mom. So I hope that answers your question. I think it's kind of cool because they're like, wow, like, oh, you're a journalist on TV. So that's an important role to me. But I know my number one job now is to be a good mom as well. So.
Well,
Yeah.
I just am so glad that you decided to come here because
thanks for having me.
This
This is so
room
fun.
is filled with some of the best PR pros in the industry, some of the top leaders covering some of the biggest issues that
Yeah.
our region faces. And everyone who will watch this, it will be widely shared with other communicators. And I'm glad we finally got to know who is Hetty Chang.
Yes.
Because you have an incredible bright road ahead,
Thank
even though
you.
you've already had a decade here.
Yeah.
Excited to see what the next decade brings. And I'm
Me
sure that
too.
queen status will be achieved pretty quickly.
She will pass the crown over.
Thank you, Hetty, so much for your
Thank
time.
you, Brenda. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone, for coming.